All right, well, everybody that's here, my name is Sherry Hendricks. I am the registrar at Spring Arbor University, and I have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Jim Dolson to you for this session. And the session is entitled, if I can get it up, Leading and Following in a Divided Workplace, Liturgical Technologies That Shape Us. So this should be a very interesting discussion. And let me just give you a little bit of information about Mr. Dolson. He is an adjunct instructor at Spring Arbor University, correct? And outside of teaching, Jim does business development and manages the corporate safety program for U.S. Staffing Agency in Jackson. And before he joined the U.S. Staffing Agency, he spent 8 years as a superintendent in a local K through 12 Christian school. And then before entering education, he spent 25 years in the automotive industry, holding a variety of different jobs in engineering, manufacturing, and management. He has a degree in computer engineering from the University of Michigan and a master's and doctorate degree in educational leadership from Eastern Michigan University. He also is an adjunct instructor, not just for Spring Arbor University, but for 5 other universities. And he teaches undergraduate and graduate business and leadership. He's passionate about helping adult learners and studying in the business and with a biblical worldview. And he and his wife, Kathy, have been married for 38 years and have 4 children and a bunch of grandchildren too. So let's welcome Dr. Dolson. Give him a little bit of applause, and then I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Well, let me share my screen here, and we'll get right to it. Let me move this over here. Oops. Let me stop share and restart that again. Move it over here. Well, as you guys all know, with Zoom, there's like 10 different ways you can do things, and sometimes they all get crossed. And sometimes that happens to me too. And I use Zoom quite a bit, actually. So in different places I teach, but even still, even this morning when I was listening to Dr. Chan, I was having a little trouble with my audio. It's like, this is Zoom 101. Why am I having trouble? Well, anyways, listen, thanks for letting me do this. I was telling Dr. Chan earlier today that, of course, all these were canceled and rescheduled from last year at this time. And a year ago, this topic of discussion I'm going to carry on with you was different, a little bit different. And I've had the last year to like reflect and really think on this and maybe even add some deeper insight to what I'm talking about. Now, as we get started, if you're good with this, I'd love for you to do this. Use chat, the chat box if you want to. Send some questions out. And I'm also interested in just a little bit about your demographics, nothing personal, but like, hey, about how old are you? You don't have to give me your exact date, but how old of a person is on right now? What's your station in life? Are you retired? Are you working? Are you a student? That sort of thing. And, if you are working, what's your function or your title at work and that sort of thing. And like I said, as we go, please feel free to send out a chat question. I probably won't see it till the end when I stop share. Anyways, and then maybe we can talk some. This is about a 40 to 45 minute presentation. So I'm hoping we'll have 10-15 minutes left over just to have some conversation. So Sherry introduced me nicely, but let me just reduce myself to like this. Okay, I'm the little blue guy in the middle right there. So when you see this blue guy throughout the presentation, I'm really talking about me. Okay, and Sherry, let me just do a quick check. Sherry, can you hear me okay and see the screen fine? Sherry? Uh-oh.
Yeah, it's all good. I'm sorry, I had to find my unmute button.
Well, quick little story. When I was at work doing about a 20-minute training session with somebody or with a group of people, I got about 10 minutes in and someone finally said, do you want to share your screen because we can't see you? So it's like, I wanted to make sure that wasn't going on. So anyways, this is me, the little blue guy. And so a little bit about me, a little more depth maybe, or a little more information than what Sherry had shared. So I'm 58. Obviously, I'm a white male. I am a baby boomer, so I was born in 1962, right about the time when boomers were leaving and Gen Xers were coming in. Okay, right about that time period. I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. I came to know Jesus Christ. I was raised in a Christian home, but I came to know Christ, I would say formally or very distinctly, at a Billy Graham crusade at the Silverdome, which is now torn down. It was back in October of 1977. Billy Graham was doing a crusade through the area, and I went forward on the 50-yard line at the Silverdome. Anyway, so that's a little bit about my faith, just in background. Like Sherry said, I've been married 37 years to Kathy. We have 4 adult grown children, all married, 10 grandkids here. One more on the way. We'll be here in June. So we have a quiver full of grandkids. I was raised by parents, though, who had their own small business and ran it for almost 50 years, their own small business here in Jackson, which plays into some of my background, how I think as well. Now, professionally, I've worked in the IT world. I've been an engineer for some automotive components here in Jackson for a tier 1 automotive supplier. Worked in manufacturing for quite a long time. Was also superintendent of a local Christian school, Jackson Christian School here in Jackson for a number of years. I do business development right now and manage our safety program at U.S. Staffing. And like Sherry said, I'm an adjunct prof at 6 Christian universities. I only teach at Christian universities because that idea of communicating the biblical worldview to adult learners, and I consider adult learners anybody's 18 or more, okay? So that would include young adult learners. It's important to me. This is kind of like my ministry for the church at large, if you will. And I want to work professionally. This is important. I want to work professionally for 20, maybe 22, maybe 23 years. I don't know, till sometime I'm 80, maybe a little bit more than 80. So I think I got a good 20 plus years left in me. Maybe not all where I'm at right now, but certainly being able to teach, hopefully, and interact with people. Well, that's me, but now I'm going to put myself in my workplace. All right. I am, for the first time ever, the oldest person at work. I'm a leader of others, but I don't right now have anybody working for me at this particular moment. But I have what's called information and expert power, which means I have some information. I have things that people want to know. I have knowledge that I can share with people that they need or want. And then in terms of expert power, I have a number of competencies that I'm pretty good at that I can help people with. So I have a couple different angles on power where I work. But I'm also different on many levels from the people that I work with. Social, political, my faith is a little bit different and often different than the people I work with. And I mentioned my parents had their own business. So for me, rewards at work ought to be based on results, not effort. And this actually, is as simple of a statement that is, causes sometimes a lot of consternation and division where I work, because I'm about a results kind of a person, rewarding that and not just the effort put in. Another thing I observe at work, besides my peeps there that I work with, is also this thing. And this is no surprise. You all know this. Our nation's divided over, let's just call them ideological boundaries for now. And I'll put it in terms of political terms, although you can express it differently. Conservatism versus liberalism, okay, divides our nation. And today the conversation is rarely about discourse. Instead, it's trying to convince the other side of a viewpoint. So it gets very contentious. You think you know what I'm talking about. Each side on that divide, doesn't matter which side you're on, feels victimized when they don't perceive that they have any influence or voice to the other side. It's funny, as I was reflecting on this, when I started working professionally in my early 20s, let me shut my phone off here, folks. Sorry. The walls of the workplace, the organization, were pretty solid. And by that, I mean, when I went to work, I would have to take my coat of principles and values off to a point. I have to take it off, hang it at the door. So things socially, politically, or from a faith perspective that were important to me, I sort of had to take them off, hang them at the door, and then adopt a temporary coat to put on when I went into the workplace. The companies at that time were very definitive about what they wanted you to believe, how they wanted you to behave. and what values were important to them. Today, it's not so much true. Today, what happens is this divide that I mentioned that's in our country walks into the workplace. So whatever's going on the outside of the company, the walls of the organization, let's just call them porous, comes right in. And so the division on the outside often walks in and becomes divisive inside as well. And that started changing around the 90s, it seems like, just anecdotally when I was thinking about it. Okay, so here's like a statement of the problem that I'm facing. I want to remain an influencer, a leader in a divided workplace, knowing that my values are different from many of my coworkers, and they're getting more divided. And maybe reducing that down a little bit more, I would say it this way. The problem I have at work, and some of you may be able to relate to this, and some of you may not, and some of you might be able to relate to this in a couple of decades from now. But leading others whose values are significantly different from mine over the next 20 years is kind of the problem that I'm facing. And so when I thought about this, I thought, you know what, I'm actually on a journey. I need a new skill, one that I don't have today that I need to develop. So I need to develop a skill that will constantly challenge me to adjust my thinking and my behavior as I lead others whose values are significantly different than mine. And they're growing more different all the time. I'm going to repeat this statement a number of times. And if you break it down to just like a little bit of a prescription, if you will, what I need on this journey is I gotta find this skill that I'm looking for. I should be able to put some meat behind it, some better definition behind it, and then I ought to be able to use it as I go. So that's kind of the setup for what I'm looking at. Now, when I start thinking about some of the skill, this particular new skill, really put it in the realm of what a soft skill might be. And you can see a definition here. But if I break that definition down to and what I think are the three major points about soft skills help us work well with other people. It's not like, not like math. Math is a hard skill. Driving a car, that's a hard skill. But these are soft skills, working well with other people. But they're also self-regulatory, a soft skill will help you correct your own behavior, your own actions as you go. And then it should be something I can learn and be really good at. Should be able to develop some competencies around this particular soft skill. So kind of with that in mind, I looked at a list of soft skills that are out there, and this is a short list. I think the list is probably 70 plus on formally defined soft skills that you can learn. And so while these are all really good, and I wish I had all these soft skills, I really don't. I wish I had them all. What I'm looking for, I think, is a little bit different. And certainly there's a lot. If you look at this list closely and you study, you start to figure out a lot of these soft skills overlap with each other. Okay. So I'm back to thinking about what is it that this is kind of the essence of this soft skill that I'm looking for. So I landed on this text. I've taught this a couple of courses at Spring Arbor and one at another university that utilize this text and self-leadership. So self-leadership, if you dig into this particular concept, goes like this. You have to learn to lead yourself before you can lead others. And that's like a Captain Obvious statement, right? That would make sense to most people. But there's some specifics to that as well, like removing negative cues from your life, doing some self-observation, self-goal setting. So you set goals without people having to tell you to set goals, knowing what your purpose is, this idea of self-reward and even self-punishment, natural rewards and understanding what those are, and monitoring yourself. So the idea of kind of put it in graphical format for a moment. The idea of self-leadership looks like this. Leadership in of itself is a process of influencing other people to get things done. So I'm, using that information power and expert power that I was telling you about. I can inform and help lead and influence the people that I work with. All right. But self-leadership is a little bit different. You're doing it to you. All right. So it's a process of influencing yourself to get things done. So it's a hard look in the mirror and a reflection back of some sort of process that you need to change about you, okay? Influencing yourself to get things done. So as a reminder, my journey is to develop this new skill to adjust my thinking and my behaviors. I lead other people. And those people have different values than mine. And those values are going wider, it seems like, as time goes on. So I'm thinking to myself, is self-leadership this skill that I need to develop? I mean, it's something I've been working on, but I really haven't embraced maybe self-leadership the way I should. It's not like embedded, if you will, into my DNA. And so I start thinking, is there something else out there, some X factor that can amp up self-leadership inside of me? So as I develop this skill, can I make it like this super soft skill, if you will, for me, so that I can work well with others as I go through these next 20 years? And it's self-regulating. It's something that I can become good at. And so as I thought about that, our topic, liturgy. So I asked myself, I wonder if there's something with liturgy that if it's, cross-multiplied, if you will, with self-leadership, would it give me this new skill? And so I started thinking about that. And I want to take you on a brief tour of the liturgy concept. And oh, how did that get there? I'm a U of M fan, of course. Okay, so let's talk about this idea of liturgy. If you've learned anything yet this week about liturgy, there's quite a vast difference, or a vast definition of liturgy that's out there. This fellow wrote in the late 50s quite a bit about theology, and he touched on the idea of liturgy. And he said, hey, listen, liturgy is this public worship of the church, really of God, but inside the church. The Greeks, it turns out, had defined liturgy as this service that's done for the common welfare, so service done for the common good. It's actions, liturgy are actions that have a social and political impact. It's the great work of the people. The worship of God is liturgy. There's this idea of community service. It's ordered, it's ceremonial, it's decorative. It's an act of worship, it's ritual. So there's a lot of regulation of the exercise of public worship, according to Miller, when he wrote about liturgy. But there's more than that. Here's another look at it. So Peter Atkins, when he was writing about memory and how we memorize things and how we know things, connected it to liturgy, which is an interesting look. He said, you know what? Liturgies are those words that we say and the things that we read. It's this pattern of repetition of words or phrases to like ingrain it into our head. It's this reenactment of important events and stories that are told. So when you think about, for example, the Christmas story that you tell at Christmas time, that's like a liturgy that you tell every year. It's repetitive once a year, but it reenacts a story. It's a connection. Atkins says that liturgy is a connection with memories and stories and principles from the past. They're methodical. And it's a way to teach and retain knowledge. So these literatures are not just the hymns that we sing on Sunday morning or the readings that we do on Sunday mornings at church. They're really teaching us and helping us to retain knowledge. Interesting, he makes the point that liturgy is also this trigger that reminds us of what's important so that we can achieve something, some sort of desire. So liturgy is like a trigger to remind you, oh yeah, I should be about that, okay? Well, let's look at this fellow, James Smith. He writes a lot about liturgies. He writes a lot about about the culture in the church and touches on liturgies quite a bit. He says this about liturgies. He says, it's a set of practices that inform or form our devotions. They're rituals. I think you're starting to see some repeating things here, like rituals. It helps us form our most fundamental desires. He also says it helps us focus on what matters most, and that liturgies train our hearts through our bodies. So the things that we do kind of form our identity, form our hearts. He mentions that liturgies are a way for us to pledge our allegiance to something. And again, the common theme starting to develop here tells us a story about what's important. Really interesting, he makes the point that liturgies are jealous. They want all of the competing practices in our life to be subordinate to them. So liturgy isn't just a habit. It's not just a practice. Liturgies, the way that Smith looks at them, want to like own us and really form us. Let's take a look at another one. This guy, Holsinger, when he was studying how theories developed, I don't know who looks at this stuff, but it was really interesting, how theories developed in medieval times, how theories came to be. And he says, liturgy is a big part of that. Words and practices are part of the worship. That's part of liturgy. But he also makes the point that liturgy is a way to spark activism. It's a way to spark change. As important, he says that liturgy is an investment in something that's absolute. It's this personal labor, like hearkening back to what the Greeks said, that there's this idea that liturgies is something you're giving back to the community. You're not expecting anything back for it. Liturgies also put some boundaries on how we think, primarily through those stories and whatnot, and it's cyclical. And it connects the past to the present. Holsinger says, liturgies take things from the past that may seem singular as they are, but they're really not. They're moving towards us. Takes these events from the past, and liturgies are like this big arc that bring us back to where we are today. So we understand the past in the present, and liturgies help us do that. Chapel, when he writes about making sure that we're communicating the gospel in every worship service that we has, he says, liturgies are structured, they're ordered, they're impacted by culture. Again, they tell the story of what happened in the past. It's a reenactment, if not through our actions, at least through our words. Liturgies are reenactments of events. And it's pretty cool to think about that. Liturgies kind of unite us. They form boundaries, and we step inside those boundaries because we're familiar with them, and we're bounded to other people, like united with them. And Sen writes this, Frank Sen, he says, when he's studying the Christian church and Christian liturgy, he says, liturgy is this vehicle that we use to publicly worship God in front of other people. It's community-based. Again, going back to the idea that liturgy isn't just necessarily for us, it's about how we communicate to our community and how we interact with it. It's repetitive. Communicates something about God to the other people around us. There's order to it. And that each of our liturgies, we might have a different role in our liturgies. Like when I go to church, they don't let me sing in the choir, nor should they, okay? Because I would chase people away. So that's not really my thing. But so we all had like this different role in whatever liturgies that we're involved in. Well, when you put all this together on a piece of paper, it's a big mess. So you start looking at all these different definitions, and you do what we call a qualitative analysis. We start looking for themes, and then axial themes that go across all these texts that I've just talked about. And so I'm going to show you 3 buckets or 3 categories that I seen bubble up out of this liturgy frame, these liturgy documents. And the first one is this idea that liturgies teach us something. They remind us something. They give us some order to life. That's liturgies define the boundaries of standards for us, and that liturgies also communicate what matters most to us or to the community, whatever the context might be. But there's this other bucket too that seems to develop out of the study of liturgy, and that is it's procedural, it's pattern, it's methodical, it's ritual, it's something you do over and over and over again, and it becomes part of your love for whatever it is that you're working on. And there's a third bucket. It's not cheap. Liturgy is not free. It costs something. It's an investment. It's this jealousy that Smith talked about, that everything else should be subordinate to this particular liturgy. It's jealous. And it considers cultural settings and it acknowledges a standard. So when you start looking at these, you start understanding too that there's a relationship between all 3 of these buckets. This group over here of ritualness and methodicalness is applied towards these things over here to reinforce these things over here, to reinforce our desires, to help us set boundaries. So this methodicalness, this ritualness impacts this. But this also goes the other way too. Our things that we practice, these procedures, these procedural things, these steps that we take, this ritual, they cost us something. They're not free. Again, this is more than just a habit that we do. These are things that really cost us something. And in doing so, they're also, this is also very much focused on achieving these things over here, about understanding what matters most. Well, if you take this and you continue on with a qualitative analysis and you reduce it down to a little bit simpler form, you get a framework that looks, I think, similar to this, where we have our actions, which are directly impacting what matters most, but those actions are sacrificial. They come with sacrifice, and those sacrifices are also directed at what matters most. Well, to make this really usable, we got to put in some sort of a sentence that we can talk about and manipulate. So what I propose is, here's the liturgy framework that I've developed just by looking at those documents and those texts that I was looking at. And then is this: a liturgy is a pattern of action that requires sacrifice to achieve what matters most. So it's a pattern of action that requires sacrifice to achieve what matters most. So just a reminder, this is the journey I'm on to try to develop a skill that's going to constantly challenge me to adjust my thinking and my behavior as I lead others who are significantly different, whose values are significantly different than mine, and they're growing more different day by day, year by year. And so I'm in search of the skill first, and I think I'm getting close. So it seems like liturgy might be that thing that can help me with self-leadership, but like, what does that really look like? So if you've ever seen Ghostbusters, you should never cross the swords, right? Bad things might happen. Well, in this case, I would say good things are going to happen. Because if I take a look at this idea of self-leadership, which is the process of influencing yourself to get things done, and I look for the intersection or the nexus of liturgy, which is a pattern of action that requires sacrifice to achieve what matters most, I think I land on this intersection. And that is, it's a concept called self-liturgy, which is a process of continual sacrifice to achieve what matters most in my life. So the setting here is self-liturgy is about me. It's not about the whole entire community. It's not about all the other people that I work with right now. It's just about me. Self-liturgy is about me. It's this continual sacrifice, process of continual sacrifice to achieve what matters most in my life. Okay, so you're going to see this definition again, but I just want to introduce it to you. So what might that look like, for example, maybe in my life, maybe in your life? I got a couple of a few examples here, just to like maybe get you thinking in this direction. So if you say what matters most to me is unity with other people, and I'm just going to pick on work for a minute, all right? If what matters most to me is unity with other people at work, then that will mean a continuous sacrifice on my part of going through a reconciliation process. I'm always going to be reconciling to try and close this gap of values so that I'm reconciled with people, all right? It would also mean regular sacrifice and realignment of my own values. Now, I'm not suggesting that unity is that important that you should do that. All I'm saying is if you pick unity as your most important thing, that's what matters most in your life, you should be prepared for some sacrifices that you may or may not be willing to make. What about this one? If what matters is my career, then it's going to take frequent sacrifice of time to invest in relationship building with professionals, this network building concept, all right? If that's what's really important to me, that's one of the things I'm going to have to sacrifice is some time. I might also have to sacrifice picking my family up and moving them to a new location for the sake of building a resume and building experience. That may come with this whole idea of this continuous sacrifice if what matters is my career. But let's look at a little bit, maybe a little more closer to, if what matters most to me is my relationship with my wife, Kathy, my spouse, then it's going to take an ongoing sacrifice of my time to know her better. Even after 37 years of marriage, it still takes quite a bit of sacrifice to do that. And I'm always going to want to be sacrificing the things that are important to me for things that are important to her, right? Again, the self-liturgy is this process of ongoing sacrifice to achieve what matters most. And if I say that Christ is my most important relationship, then that better mean I'm ready to regularly sacrifice my time to know him better. And it might also mean, it should mean, a continuous sacrifice of my glory in exchange for his in my life. All right, so that gives you an idea, a little bit of maybe how to use self-liturgy. So I'm going to cross this off the list for now, just saying, okay, I think there's something with the self-liturgy as a potential soft skill for me that I can use in my life to achieve, to take care of this problem I've been talking about. You know, when I look at this definition, though, self-liturgy is a process of continual sacrifice to achieve what matters most in my life. It bubbles up some questions, doesn't it? Like, what really matters to me? What is continual sacrifice? What does that really look like for me? And how am I doing at achieving what matters most? It's all fine to say that I'm ready to do these things, but if I'm not doing them, why even bother, right? So we need a way to uncover the answers to these questions. And I propose that we need a technology to help us. Now, I am not talking about this kind of technology. If you have to plug it in or put a battery in it, that's not what I'm talking about, all right? So what I want to do is take us on, again, a little tour of technology and what that concept of technology is really about. Because I'm very sure for some of you, this is going to be a new definition of technology. It's not what you think, all right? So Thompson, when he writes about organizational development, and how companies function in light of different crises and that sort of thing. He says this, he says, you know what? You need a technology. It's an activity or a set of activities to achieve a desired outcome. So your company's over here and you want to be over here. You need some sort of technology to help get you there, all right? It's this idea of transformation from something into something else, okay? That's what he considers a definition of technology. And this fellow, Heidegger, when he writes, he's writing about kind of like how we self-regulate our behavior and that sort of thing. He says, you know, technology is a way to reveal something that's otherwise hidden. It's something that's unconcealed. And he says you need this instrument, this thing to unconceal kind of some truth that's inside of you. And I'm going to quickly add, by the way, a lot of the folks that I'm referencing here, they're not believers. In fact, they might even be atheists, okay? But let's just be honest. We know that God can use anybody that he wants to reveal truth. So I don't think that these things are outside of God's truths. But these folks, I wouldn't put these folks on a pedestal and admire them, okay? Because they're not believers. So just be careful if you read them. But anyways, he also said, you know, you need an instrument that unlocks some sort of unknown, hidden truth. And this guy, Foucault talks about this when he's talking about psychology in general. He said, you know, technologies are practices that help people function by regulating their own behavior. So these technologies kind of keep us in a boundary if we're going to pay attention to them. One last definition. If you've never read this, if you're especially, listen, it doesn't matter which curriculum you're in. This is a great read for anybody by Clayton Christensen. And he says this about technology. He says, you know what? It's a process that transforms work, material, or information into greater value. So you got this thing over here, but some sort of technology expands its use, expands its values to a greater audience. That's what he would say technology is. So similar to what I did with liturgy, let's take a look at the technology framework, these themes that develop inside the definitions of technologies and some of these authors I referenced. And then we'll see if we can connect them together. One of the buckets, categories that come out is that in technology, there's this idea that something is now unconcealed, it's unlocked. It's something that's different than it was before. It's now a known truth, when before it was an unknown truth. And that's kind of this other bucket over here. It's something that gets changed into something else. It has something, there's something like that's hidden, some hidden value that's going to get unleashed and opened up. And that all happens through these activities, this instrument, as one author called it, an instrument to change. And when you start looking at these things, you see there's definitely a connection here, that these things over here, where the value is hidden, goes through a transformation process. Some instrument will reveal something that's hidden or something that wasn't known before into a known truth. And if you just break that down a little more simply, it looks like this. Something unknown gets fed into this instrument, if you will, and that instrument reveals something different. This is kind of the idea of technology that we're looking at, that something unknown goes into this instrument and it gets revealed. And if you connect that a little bit to our idea of liturgies, something unknown about our liturgy gets fed into this instrument, and suddenly then something about our liturgy, in this case our self-liturgy, is revealed that we didn't know about. All right. So very simply, when I use the term liturgical technologies, I'm saying this: those are instruments that reveal our liturgy. All right. So let's drive this back home to these three questions. What really matters to me? What is continual sacrifice for me? And how am I doing at it? How is my life really doing at this? So I've defined three different liturgical technologies to help me answer these questions. The first liturgical technology is some sort of an instrument, and I'll break this down a little bit more here in a minute so you get a feel for this, but it's an instrument to help reveal what matters to me, like what's really important in my life. That's the first liturgical technology, is that instrument. The second instrument, the second technology, it's an instrument to reveal what continual sacrifice means to me or for me, okay? And then the third one is the third technology, the third liturgical technology. It's an instrument that reveals how I'm really doing and achieving what matters most. Again, I say something really matters to me, but really how am I doing at it, all right? So if I look at this first instrument for a minute, this instrument to reveal what matters most to me, I would propose that answer is based on your worldview. It's how you see, how is the universe created? What is the definition of truth? Is there absolute truth, or is all truth relative? It's these kinds of questions that are, infused into your worldview. And here's what Jesus said. When he was pressed on what was most important, he said this: what really matters is to love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. So Jesus would answer that the most important things to him were to love God and to love neighbor. And Smith said it, speaking of the church and writing about the human condition, he said, I am what I love. We are, in our essence, we are lovers. Oftentimes our love is pointed at the wrong things, but he said, really, we all want something to love. He says, we are lovers. So when I think about that a little bit more, I developed a few questions, just three of them, that maybe help, at least for me, get a little bit closer to what's important to me. So I asked myself, what is it I am passionate about? What wall will I break through? What causes me to charge forward in the face of obstacles that I'm passionate about? What is it that I really want to achieve at almost all cost? If you've ever read this poem by Ellis, it's this idea of the dash on your gravestone. So if you think about your gravestone, there's the birth year dash your death year. And her point in this poem, and the other subtopics that go with that, is what did you do with your dash? What did you do with your life? Because whatever it is that you did, that must have been what was most important to you, because that's what you spent your life doing. And said a little bit differently, is the people that are important to you in your life, what will they remember you for when you're gone? More personally, when I'm gone, what will people say about what I did with my life? Those are the things that I have to be concerned about what matters most to me. Let's look at this second instrument for a minute. And that's this instrument will reveal what continual sacrifice means for us, for me, okay? Another liturgical technology, and it's this couple of questions. This is out of Second Chronicles. Like, what idols am I willing to continually smash, remove, get rid of to achieve what matters most? What is it that I'm willing to sacrifice to get out of my life to achieve what matters most? And as important is the complement to that, what actions am I willing to engage in to achieve what matters most? So it's kind of a two-folded question. What are you going to get rid of, and what are you going to do? Now, this third liturgical technology instrument actually found an existing survey. It's a research-based survey, and you can see the reference down there. And this group of researchers developed this to help people understand how satisfied they are with their own life. And it's based on what we call a Likert scale, where 7 is strongly agree and 1 is strongly disagree. So in what ways, in most ways, my life is close to my ideal. Strongly agree, strongly disagree. Conditions of my life are excellent. I'm satisfied with my life. I like this last question because it's pretty, it digs, all right? If I could live my life over, I would change almost nothing. Strongly agree or strongly disagree. Now, I'm going to take you through in just a minute here my own personal responses to these questions, all right? So you can see how I've used them. And maybe it's helpful to you, maybe you can use them as well. So when we talk about self-liturgy, again, it's this process of continual sacrifice to achieve what matters most in my life or your life. And so, I'm developing these technologies. This first one, of course, is the instrument to review what matters most, which feeds in now to an instrument to reveal what continual sacrifice means for me as I try to achieve what matters most. And how am I doing at it? And if I'm not doing well, or depending on how I'm doing, I'm feeding it right back up to the first question. So you're seeing this process develop with these technologies and how to use them. And that's the process that's part of this self-liturgy. This is the process of understanding, this continual sacrifice to achieve what matters most in life, in my life or your life. Okay, so I've kind of found this skill called self-liturgy, the soft skill, and I think I've got some definition behind it now. I've got these liturgical technologies to help me understand and define my own self-liturgy a little bit better. Now I got to start using it. All right. So what I want to take you through is just kind of how I'm responding to some of these questions. So this is where I'm being very transparent, very open. And these are not the church answers. I'm not giving you church answers here. I'm telling you, and by that, what I mean is like, sometimes when we go to church, we tell everybody things are great, things are going well, and they're not always going well. Or, we're not very honest with people. So I think these are close to my being honest as I can with you, with a group of strangers about these questions. So what am I passionate about? This first liturgical technology question, this instrument. What am I passionate about? What's that dash? What do people going to remember me for? When I really thought about this, I think it comes down to my relationships with people. And I think it starts with what matters most to me is my relationship with Christ. And I know that's always easier said than done. And you can certainly look at my life and find out where that is not necessarily true. It's called sin, right? But I would say Christ is the most important thing to me. That relationship is key, especially, I might add, as I get closer and closer to someday meeting him face to face. But my wife, certainly, and my children, grandchildren, and these are somewhat in order, I would say. Even the students I teach are important to me, the relationships that I have with them. And I just want to park on this for just a second. The what matters most question has changed over the years. When I was in my 20s, my family was important and Christ was important. But I would say I elevated work, career too high. It really was important to me. I felt it was important to us financially. I probably felt it was important to me just, I guess, emotionally as well, like a self-worth kind of a thing. But God has worked that out of me. And so I would say pretty honestly today, the things that are most important are my relationships. But honestly, that wasn't true decades ago. And sometimes God's sanctifying work in our hearts works that out of us, works us through that, and gets us to the point where love God and love your neighbor are more important than career and money and that sort of thing. So if you're looking at this and thinking about this, just remember what matters most often does change as God sanctifies us and works on us. Well, what about the second technology, this instrument to reveal what continual sacrifice means for me? So I'm thinking about, these idols that might be in my life that I have to think about and remove, and what actions am I going to take? And I would say this, when you consider this particular question, it's really context specific or domain specific. Certainly whatever I do when I answer this question about who Christ is, then it impacts all areas of my life. But how I answer this question about my wife or my kids is different than how I answer it for coworkers. Like the sacrifices I make for my kids and grandkids, it's going to be different than the sacrifices I make perhaps for my coworkers, as an example. So what I want to take you through is just a few of the sacrifices that I'm working on right now, because this connects closely, a little more closely to this problem that I'm facing at work, this challenge that I'm facing at work that I've mentioned a few times. And so these are going to seem really strange and maybe even like, that's kind of weird, but these are the things I'm thinking about. So, and some things I've started doing already. So one of the sacrifices I'm making is I'm stop listening to news that I like, and instead listen to the other side more, to news I wouldn't normally listen to. And again, it's not to adopt a different set of values, but just to understand how somebody else thinks. How about this one? I've committed to stop wanting to win debates on a myriad of topics, social justice topics in particular. And instead, I want to start listening for understanding, again, without giving up my values. Just listen for understanding, not to win a debate. Another sacrifice, learning to appreciate a younger generation's music. I got to tell you, it's tough for me. So I grew up in the 70s and 80s, born in the 60s. My definition of fun to listen to new music is not the same as this current generation's. But as you all know, music communicates cultural value. And there's cultural value that I need to learn by listening to the younger generation's music. How about this one? Giving up reading pleasures, the stuff I like to read, in exchange for understanding how millennials think, how Gen Zers think. If you're between the ages of basically probably 11 or 12, all up to about 24, you're in Gen Z. And I want to know more about how they think. In fact, I read, if you see it or not, this book called Instabrain about Gen Z, really interesting. And I was thinking about teaching as well, continuing to teach on as long as I can. It's a great sacrifice of my time, but I want to know more about how the younger generations of people think. And kind of a sombering thought was, if I teach for another and work professionally for another 20 or 22 years, people who are going to be in my classroom aren't even born yet. All right. If I teach for another 22 years, I'm going to have people in my classroom who are not even here yet. So I better have this process down. I answered this question, this particular instrument, an instrument to reveal how I'm doing in achieving what matters most. Remember, 7 strongly agree, and 1 strongly disagree. And I think I answered these honestly. And the one that brings me probably the greatest heartache is this one. If I could live my life over, I would change almost nothing. I probably could even justify a 3. In other words, I'm leaning towards that strongly disagree thing. Okay. But with this in mind, it kind of tells me how I'm doing, how I'm not doing. So I got to make some changes as I go. So where are we at? So I think on this journey, I'm using it. I'm using these technologies to help my liturgy, my self-liturgy develop. These are the different technologies that I've come up with so far to help me understand how my self-liturgy is doing. And again, as I think about this particular journey that I'm developing the skills I go that will constantly challenge me and adjust my thinking and my behaviors, I lead others. As I lead others whose values are significantly different than mine. And those values are going wider and wider and wider, it seems, as I go. All right, so here's just a cruise through the different references. And anyways, yeah. So what kinds of questions or thoughts might you have? There's my contact information. So yeah, what's everyone thinking? I totally bamboozled you, I can tell, because you're not asking any questions.
Hi. I can just say I like the way that you had your presentation set up with just kind of the way that you personified yourself and walked us through. It was very interesting and kept me involved in everything you were saying. So
I appreciate that. Thanks. Yeah, I'll try to remember the little blue guy seems to. Who knows? Other thoughts or questions?
I agree with Paige that the presentation was put together very well and very organized. And I like how you had different practical steps to follow through and like apply to our lives. And it wasn't like something abstract that we were like wondering about, but these are like actions that we can actually take to improve our own liturgy.
Yeah. And I thank you for mentioning that, Hope. I do hope I want people to walk away with, like I'm walking away with some skills that I can continually make myself better. And I say all of that under the umbrella that Christ is always sanctifying me. This is not me doing it to me. This is the work of the Holy Spirit inside me, working me, changing me, so that I'll be ready one day to meet my Lord. Yeah. Okay, this is the part where it's awkward silence. Now, if we were in a classroom, I would ask a question. I would just let the silence hang there for a while until someone finally, someone who doesn't like the silence finally answers.
I can just jump in and make a quick comment here that I did get a chat from somebody in the session that asked where the recording was going to be posted. And I don't know at this point, but I sent a message to the CPLA director to make sure that an announcement goes out to everyone where the recording will be posted. So unless you have that answer, Jim, I don't know.
I got an email a little while ago. I think as all the presenters did, we got an email that says, when you get your link, store it here. And, but I'm not sure where that's at yet.
I think it's the plan. I think the plan is to make it accessible, but it might take some time. So if someone is hoping to watch that and listen to that, to write a reflection paper, like for my class, well, there's no guarantee that it would be available within 24 hours or something like that.
And Dr. Chan's gonna let you out of a quiz if you watch this entire thing, I hear. So.
Yeah.
Any other comments or thoughts?
We have the Jim, and frankly, I didn't know what to expect walking into this workshop, but you had done a very good job, an outstanding job, and the part that I like is what you talked about yourself. You made yourself vulnerable, and as someone who is in an age with all kinds of experience under your belt, and you decide to embrace the idea that what I need to do better, to relate to someone who's younger, someone who's different than me, and not because what you have to, but you choose to do that because what it matters to you. And well, having married for 37 years, and well, you might say to yourself, well, it's not anything that I need to change in my marriage,
right.
Or having kids and grandkids, but you can safely say well, I'm who I am, and I'm going to let them change themselves to accommodate me. So it takes a lot of boldness and humility to say that what I want to step out of my comfort zone, because well, this matters to me, to understand my students. Some of them might not have been born yet, like you said, and some of them are co-workers who are maybe 20, 30 years younger than you, they think very differently. But
Right.
if I want to be a leader and want to influence them in a positive way, I have to start changing myself. So thank you.
Yeah, that was a great summary, actually. You should give my presentation next time.
But, well, because you did it well. That's what the good instructors do. When they do a good job, students what they find it easy to recap, to summarize what has been shared.
Yeah. Good. Thanks, Caleb. Sherry, I guess unless anybody else has a question, it's I guess I'm going to turn it back to you.
Okay, well, I'll just say thank you everybody for coming and participating in this session, and we had a really good turnout. So I'm thankful for Dr. Dolson for that to happen, and I wish you all well. Have a good day. Attend the next session, and see you later.